Hey, it's Best Business Partners with Jess and Erin. We are here with Captains for Clean Water, which we are thrilled to have on board here with Chris Wittman, one of the co-founders of Captains for Clean Water. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming and spending your time with us and giving us a little insight for our listeners on all that Captains does for our community and our waterways, and which has been tremendous in the last, 8 years? Is it 8 years?
Yeah, almost
this
9
year?
years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was I'm going to be honest, full disclosure, I totally Googled you really quick to get some questions only 5 minutes ago,
Not
so the questions are not real deep, so you don't have to worry.
No issue there. I'm going to use Chat GPT to
Perfect. Well, that's what I normally use,
questions.
so I didn't even get time to do that shit. So. Anyway, tell us a little bit about you and how you came to this and starting Captains.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised here. I grew up on Sanibel Island.
Nice.
Growing up on an island, your life quite literally revolves around the water, and so pretty naturally, coming into a career, I wanted to figure out how to be on the ecosystem, and on the waters that I loved, and the best way to do that was to be a fishing guide, and I could be out where my office was a boat on the waters I grew up on, and I could also share what I loved about Southwest Florida with other people, and being a part of making memories for people that they will remember likely for the rest of their life. So it was an amazing career, and one that ultimately led me to be firsthand witness of our water quality issues and those impacts, and ultimately those got severe enough that I kind of looked at the decision of what is the future of this fishery that I love, and ultimately walked away from kind of my dream job to try to fight to save that fishery.
To fix your dream job, to fix your
Yeah.
the ability to enjoy our waterways.
Do you look back and go, what the heck was I thinking?
I certainly miss watching the sunrise from the deck of a skiff, for sure.
Yeah.
That's fair.
For sure.
That's fair. I've seen a bunch of photos of those. I'm sure we share many. We're from here too. I'm born and raised here myself, and some of the many friends Jimmy Burnstead and I go way back. May have been my high school sweetheart.
That's not
so
one of it out. Sorry,
Jimmy's
cool.
a good buddy of mine.
Good friend, right? Yeah, he's a great guy. And Patty Waldo. A lot of our fishing guides here locally are near and dear to our hearts. We grew up with them.
Yep.
So
she did.
I grew up with them.
Those were all, my, I guess, co-workers.
Your people,
That's my crew, and they're all very, very involved with Captains now.
Yes,
it's awesome.
And we support Captains because I'm an avid boater. As you know, we have Southwest Florida Boaters that's growing community, and one of the things that we love to do is be able to educate our community, people that are coming in to buy, like what they can be doing, and so love that you grew up here. I love Jess is from here, and we have so many connections because of that throughout the community. But a lot of people want to know exactly what Captains are. We know you're an advocacy group. We know you're a 501c3, so you're kind of like a foundation that advocates for the water. But tell us a little bit about kind of when you started this, what your goals were, and kind of where you are right now and what you guys do.
For one, the reason Captains for Clean Water exists was to fill a void. Yeah. And you talk about using platforms like this to educate people. Yeah. What we recognized was, the more we were impacted by these water quality issues, we started looking for, was anything being done? In that process, we realized that there was environmental organizations that had been talking about this for years. Right. There were scientists that had been working on this for years. And it was not a problem that they were trying to figure out what the problem was or how to fix it. Right. The unique thing with our water quality issues here in Southwest Florida is it's largely due to draining of the Everglades, something that happened 100 years ago. Right. For many of us to develop the Everglades and for agriculture, and for many of us to be able to live in areas that we live in today. But in doing so, you threw off the balance of the entire South Florida ecosystem. We get too much fresh water from Lake Okeechobee, water that historically would go down to the Everglades and ultimately to Florida Bay, and the Everglades doesn't get enough water. And so what we saw was there was this plan put in place, coincidentally the year that I started guiding, in the year 2000, so 24 years ago now, to reconnect that system that was compartmentalized and diverted and drained, and get that water flowing back to Florida Bay, and in doing so reduce those massive damaging discharges to our coast and to the fishery. And so here we were at this point, it was 2016, and this was a 30-year plan. It was a bipartisan effort, a partnership between the state of Florida and the federal government, and it was signed into law by Governor Jeb Bush and President Bill Clinton. And it was the largest ecosystem restoration project ever to be undertaken in the world.
Wow.
And it's right here.
Right.
And so here we were, they thought this would take 30 years to do, and here we were in 2016 on the heels of a water crisis, and not a single one of the 68 projects outlined in that had been completed at the halfway mark. And,
Wow.
and what we
How did
really,
that happen? Is it a funding issue?
it was largely a funding issue,
Yeah.
and largely a political will issue. And with little political will came little funding.
Right.
And what we realized was that void that Captains was created was that people like yourselves, like your customers, like myself, people who are impacted by these water quality issues, whether it's directly to my business as a fishing guide or whether it's property values to a homeowner or anything in between, the hospitality industry, all our economy here is interconnected to our water. Those people were absent, their voices were absent in generating political will. And the reason they were absent wasn't because they didn't care, and it wasn't because they weren't impacted. It was a lack of understanding. Like myself, I'm born on grew up on the island that these discharges run into. I'm a fishing guide by career, but I was not involved.
Right.
And I wasn't involved simply because I didn't have the knowledge to know that there was a solution out there.
Right.
And the knowledge to know what my individual voice role could play in advancing that solution. And so you have these we look at it as like spokes on a wheel. And there was this void of basically awareness and education that was resulting in a lack of people advocating.
Right.
And so that's what we really built Captains for Clean Water to do, was to educate people on the problem, the solution, and the role that they, in their individual voices and in our collective voices, can play in advancing those solutions.
Love that.
So who would have imagined that you were a fishing guide and was going to turn into a scientist and figure it all out? 'Cause that's
Politician
pretty
or
much, politician,
Somewhere in
scientist, and all
between,
be- That's pretty impressive.
I think it's I definitely do not picture myself as a scientist, and certainly not as a politician.
And I
Fair.
will tell you, I dabbled, I know, when I came out of higher ed, I dabbled a little bit in political advocacy and changing legislation, and, I've walked bills through getting a bill started, and then walking it through the legislative process and watching it go into and getting to the Senate and House floor, and man alive, is it a lot of work. So kudos to you guys, because if you don't understand that process, it is so labor intensive, and you're up there, you're advocating, and you walk in one office, and devoid of who your candidate is or who you like politically, you walk in one office and they say, we've got you, we're behind this bill 100%, and you walk in the next office and they say, absolutely, I love what you guys are doing, I think it's so important, and next office, same thing, and then you go down to the floor and they vote, and they've stuck that bill into something else, and they vote, and they're like, no, and you're like, wait a minute, I was just in your office, you just said okay.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it can be maddening, and it takes a team, and we're fortunate we've built a very talented team of captains to
we love them
excel.
all. Yeah. We enjoy each one of them. They all have their own little talents.
They're all experts in what they do.
Their own,
and they're very passionate. That's the key. Everybody that works on our team is extremely passionate about their job.
What they're doing.
I think you find that in this area, especially Southwest Florida, in opposed to nothing against Southeast Florida, but Southwest Florida is it's our home.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And there's something about where you grew up and your hometown, and the people that are from here, they have a lot of passionate about that. They're very passionate about that, and it's almost like I can talk about my brother, but you better not talk about my
That's
brother.
right.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
it's the same concept. I think that so many of us are feeling that,
Yeah.
and we're tired of it.
Yeah, and our area is obviously growing. I mean, the changes that
Sure.
I've seen in my lifetime. My parents grew up here, but it still very much functions and has attributes of a small town where everybody's connected.
It sure does. I grew up on the other coast, and I think one of the big differences, Jess says, the other coast, is this does have a hometown feel.
Yeah.
You meet people that, I just met somebody last week. He grew up here. One of my neighbors came over to help batten down my boats during the storm, and he grew up here. His parents grew up here. His grandparents grew up here. There are so many, and he's told me stories off McGregor and the waters, and
Yep.
just watching the changes in the storm. But not to get too far off topic, because we want to talk about how many people do you have in Captains for Clean Water?
On staff,
Yeah.
we have 23. Some of those are part-time. I think we have 4 part-time kind of outreach people in different regions of the
Which
state.
is so important.
But yeah, the rest is we have a really good team that specializes in everything from education to messaging, communication, to policy, to operations, data, and making sure that the information and things that we're building to put out to engage people is actually working, and that they're coming in that funnel and that they're engaging and staying engaged. So yeah, we've got an amazing team.
Yeah, you
That's
sure do.
fantastic.
Let's talk about your data a little bit. So one of the things that you do is educate, and you had a study came out. Cameron Massey, who's one of your staff members, who's just dynamic and excellent. Appreciate her
is.
connecting us.
Incredible.
She's done a study, and that study kind of detailed the financial impacts on real estate, and
Yeah.
talk a little bit about and you can have your cliff notes if you need.
Yeah,
'Cause I
no,
wouldn't remember all
so
those numbers.
and I know a lot of them, off of in a ballpark, but if what we did was, for those listeners that may have been here in 2018, 2019 during that water crisis, that quite literally, shut down our coastal economy here. The hospitality industry and the restaurant industry, it was in the peak of season. You had hotels and restaurants on Sanibel Island, Captiva Island, Fort Myers Beach, that their vacancy was 100%. They were laying off their employees because they had no customers.
And explain what that water. A lot of people don't know what that water
So
crisis was. In
what that
2018.
was we had massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee because that water, like I said earlier, could no longer flow south to the Everglades.
Right.
And those discharges impact our community in a couple of ways. One is just the volume of fresh water alone is so much. Is it recording still?
It's still recording.
I just want to make
just,
sure. Okay.
We're still going.
Oh,
Okay.
they want us
Sorry,
to ring.
little technical
All right, yeah,
problem there.
we'll
Sorry
edit-
about that.
we'll
Sorry about
edit
that,
that
Chris. Yeah.
Okay, so that water crisis, we were founded because of a water crisis, 2016.
Right.
So the one in 2018-19, what it was a result of these massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee down the Caloosahatchee River, ultimately to Southwest Florida, and what they do is they impact our community in a number of ways. One is just the volume of fresh water. You're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12,000 cubic feet per second
Right.
coming out of that
Insane.
river. I mean, it's like rapids.
Right.
And so just that fresh water alone takes the saltwater fishery here. So if you picture the area in between Fort Myers Beach, Estero, Sanibel, all the way up to Boca Grande, it takes that saltwater fishery and it turns it into fresh water. And if anybody's imagine if you own a saltwater aquarium and you just put fresh water in it, everything dies.
Right.
And so the things that can swim away from it, like the fish, they can get displaced to swim, but the grass, the oysters, the benthic life that lives in the bottom, that stuff after a couple weeks of exposure to the too low salinity levels, it dies. And that's the basis of the habitat for all those things. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the nutrient load that comes from the Lake Okeechobee is extremely polluted from decades of pollution into that lake. So the pollution, which is nitrogen and phosphorus, that come with that fuel harmful algae blooms.
Right.
And in 2018, we had kind of a perfect storm scenario where there was a freshwater harmful algae bloom on Lake Okeechobee called blue-green algae. It's a cyanobacteria. It is a toxic organism that is known to be linked to neurodegenerative diseases, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. It's a potent liver toxin. And there's been pets that have, gone and drank out of that water and died.
Wow.
And so FGCU did a study, Dr. Parsons did a study where they saw that those toxins in that water also aerosolized.
Right.
And were exposing people miles and miles away from, so not just waterfront. So you had this massive blue-green algae bloom of this freshwater harmful algae bloom that was coming down the river with those discharges.
Right.
Then you had red tide bloom present, which is a natural thing in small amounts. But what happened when you dumped this nutrient-rich water into that red tide was it started supercharging it. It'd be like a normal forest fire that would burn a little area and then burn its way out.
Right.
And going over and just dumping jet fuel on it. Right. So it became much more toxic at high toxicity levels. And then it lasted for over a year. Right. And so between the blue-green algae coming down and packing into the canals along Fort Myers and Cape Coral, and then dumping into the bay where that algae was then dying because of the salt water, and then it was feeding the red tide, it literally was ecosystem collapse. And the impact that had on our community, for someone like myself, it shut down fishing. Like, you did not use your boats.
Right.
But people had to move out of their homes because of respiratory issues, because of being exposed to those toxins. Businesses were shut down. People went out of business. People in the tourism industry, the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels had to lay off their employees. We had some of the soup kitchens and people that provide groceries to the less fortunate were actually out on Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel Island because people who worked in those industries couldn't afford to feed their families. And so sad. And so we did a study. We wanted to be able to quantify what the impacts of these water quality issues are. And we talked about education. Part of it is educating the stakeholders and then empowering them to use their voice, right? But the other part of it is educating policymakers who need to send funding and prioritize these issues.
Right.
And policymakers, you can go up there and tell them how much you love snook and tarpon.
Yeah.
Or the seagrass is dying.
Got to quantify it.
But if you can go up there and tell them this is impacting the economy and these businesses and these jobs, that's a language they can directly relate to an ROI of spending money on a project. Right. And so we did a study based off of what was the economic impact to just Lee, Collier, and Charlotte County from that event. And there was economic impact in Jacksonville.
Wow. Because
of the perception that Florida's waters are in collapse. So people were canceling their trips literally to Jacksonville.
Wow.
So, but we did a study just on those main three impacted things. And some of the numbers that came back from just a few months of impact, 43,000 jobs lost.
Wow.
From one water quality event.
I mean, it was horrific.
Well, it certainly didn't make showing waterfront property easy.
There was waterfront deals that were set to close that fell apart. People walked away from.
Well, it was tough. We were showing Cape Coral properties, and if we get to towards the end of the canals where it was all building up, remember that? Oh, and we would walk out back looking at the beautiful dock that they had or a beautiful pool area, and you're like, it was,
In addition to
choking.
what we know now, I mean, I was in that doing news tours and stuff, and after a few weeks, I got double lung pneumonia. I'm like, I probably shouldn't have been doing that. But yeah, you had people walking away from deposits because they didn't want to go through the purchase of a property. And then, you 43,000 jobs lost because of a singular event is significant.
Huge.
You look at property values. I mean, our properties are our biggest investment that we have individually for 99% of the public.
Right.
And $17.8 billion in lost property value from a single event, just in those three counties.
Yeah. I mean, the silver lining is that it kind of outlined the importance of what you guys are doing, and which we don't ever want a silver lining, but our storms have some. The impact there is that that was horrific and kind of probably gave you an impetus to stop some of what was happening there, because that has definitely slowed down since then, correct?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, my motivation for getting in this fight was a water crisis.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and ultimately I quit my job. I mean, being a fishing guide is
Yeah.
my dream job from when I
Right.
was a little kid. And so yes, it does. You know, if that's happening, if there is any good to come out of
Right.
it, it is the massive spotlight
Right.
that it shines on it and the people that it's impacting.
Sure.
And it can motivate policymakers to do something about it, and it can motivate people like us to use our voice. You know,
Right.
and I think if you've experienced it, you don't. I mean, here I am, almost 9 years later. You don't forget it, and you're not going to give up.
Right.
And is it fair to say that at that specific incident, that 2018-19, did that put the gas pedal on people up in Tallahassee seeing what we needed to see?
It absolutely did. The timing there also, it coincided with an election year.
Yeah.
And
Convenient.
so it was very interesting. You would have people running for dog catcher, and the questions from the public at a town hall were, what are you going to do about water quality?
Right.
It was like, it didn't matter. It was
Right.
the hands down the number one issue that people wanted. They didn't want
Right.
to hear about, you know, anything else. They want to know, what are you doing about this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was pretty catastrophic, and it was also definitely the catalyst
Fantastic.
that really put some juice behind a movement kind of just growing organically on its own.
Fair.
So where are we now, Chris? When people say, like, kind of, I mean, it's slowed down, it's much better. And I think there's a misnomer out there. I hear it all the time, especially in the boating community. You know, red algae, red tide is always there. It's normal. It's just exacerbated when these releases come. But where are we now on, you talked initially about that big project, 68 different
Yep.
things being outlined. Where are we now today?
Yeah, and red tide is normal. It
Right.
is natural, but it usually will, you know, bloom, eat itself out of food,
Right.
and then go away.
Right.
If you just give it unlimited food,
Right.
it's going to blow up and wipe out everything. So where we're at is, you know, I mentioned when we founded the organization in 2016, not a single one of those infrastructure projects had been completed. Today, and there was very insignificant funding. Today, over 50 projects have either broken ground, hit a major milestone in their construction, or have had ribbon cuttings and are actually operational.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
And
That's like
many of it's
90%.
called SERP, or the Comprehensive
Yeah.
Everglades Restoration Plan, and you can look that up. And then the list of projects is on what's called the IDS. It's the Integrated Delivery Schedule, and it shows you those 68 projects and then a timeline of their implementation. And so, yeah, you know, if you drive from here across Tamiami Trail over to Miami now, as you get over towards the casino, you'll go over a series of bridges now.
Yep.
That's to let water flow back under Tamiami Trail that was acting like a dam, and
Wow.
get it into Shark River Slough and down to Florida
Right.
Bay. You see there's a massive, the heart of Everglades Restoration is this reservoir that's south of Lake Okeechobee that will take water from Lake Okeechobee during the wet season, put it into this reservoir, run it through a engineered wetlands, basically a man-made marsh, that cleans the water, and then it will send that clean water south to the Everglades. So instead of discharging it to our coast, they'll pull it into this reservoir. And that reservoir, when we started, we were told would never happen because it was too politically challenging. And today, the filter marsh, the engineered wetland of that, is complete.
Nice.
And is being filled with
That's
water.
awesome.
The reservoir portion itself is under construction, and they just awarded the final contract for the embankment around it. And so to put that in perspective, it's a 16,500 acre reservoir that's 30 foot tall.
Wow.
It may be hard to picture that. You could put the entire city of Manhattan inside of this reservoir.
Wow.
So
That's
it is
insane.
absolutely massive. It's and so that is it's being built, and you know, the result of people using their voice, going to policymakers, taking action when we have a call to action, whether it's to support funding or whether it's against a bad piece of legislation.
Right.
The result of that is significant progress. There's been more progress in the last 8 years on Everglades restoration than in the entire history of Everglades
Right.
restoration before it. And we're seeing that result. And so it's kind of a testament to the science could only get us so far. And the push that was needed was that void that was the stakeholders and the people and the communities that were impacted and the businesses that were impacted. And that's really been the kind of the juice that's gotten momentum going. Nice. And we've seen record funding now out of both the state of Florida and the federal government for the last 6 years, from two different, from President Trump and President Biden, from both terms of Governor DeSantis, and we're talking about increase in funding from $65 million a year to $1.2 billion a year.
Nice.
I mean, a very, very significant.
Excellent.
Well, this issue isn't a partisan thing. It's everybody's issue.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's something that we have to focus on as a community.
Yep.
If in the last 8 years, after saying all those wonderful things that are happening and going from 61 or 68 to 50 something, that's incredible. But what would be your biggest accomplishment that you've seen happen in those 8 years?
Our biggest accomplishment is getting people to understand the value of their voice and then give them a mechanism to use it. And so the conversion of people who were not involved, which was pretty much everybody. I mean, really,
I don't think there was an avenue for them to get involved.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really was like, how can we get people to understand the problem, issue, and the role they play, and then how can we give them a megaphone to use their voice? And look, you're a fishing guide, you're a realtor, you're an attorney, it doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to be able to sit there and monitor the nuances of legislation. And so if we could do that and then give people, hey, everything's going good, or hey, it's that time of year again to push for funding for the government to fund the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District, or hey, there's this really bad thing that they're trying to push through and we need to kill it. That mechanism, I think that's what I would be most proud of is getting people like myself who sat on the sidelines for my whole life to get off and get right in the middle of it.
Sure. That's awesome. Anything that the listeners can do, I love all of that, and I love that you have the platform, but a lot of people ask us, what can we do? Like, how can we get involved? And so what is the one thing that they can do? Obviously donate, and we'll have your link up there. And but what is the one thing that people can really do to get involved, to help? So
it is to make sure that they understand and they have a good knowledge of these issues. And then to get other people involved. And this is a grassroots movement. We do not influence policy. We don't have a lobbyist. We don't endorse candidates. We don't give out campaign checks. We influence policy by the power of the people. And so you are not going to talk to somebody about an issue, about anything, unless you know about it. But if you know about something and you can share how you've been impacted, then you're very likely to talk to your circle. And so the first step is to understand and educate. That's what our organization exists for. Visit our website, follow us on social media. We try to provide education in many different mediums, so that no matter if you like to read an extensive report, or you want to watch a video or listen to a podcast, or you want to see it in a 15-second snippet on TikTok. Like we do all that.
That's definitely that's just like, did you see?
So we do all these different ways for the purpose of being able for people to digest the information however they most prefer to do so. And then in doing so is to get other people, and then pay attention and don't be complacent when you think, hey, the waters are looking great. Like until we see light at the end of the tunnel right now, but we haven't crossed the finish line. And so, in the year 2000, when the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was passed, they popped champagne bottles and thought, we fixed it. We fixed it. We're going to save the Everglades. We're going to fix our water. And there we were, here we are 24 years later, and there's still a ton of work to do. So, those are the two main things. Educate yourself enough to be comfortable talking, and then seize an opportunity. If you're a realtor and you're showing people a waterfront home, talk about how valuable that is. And hey, do you know that you can use your voice? Your voice is needed, and use your platform. I use it as a guide. When I have somebody on a boat for 8 hours. Hey, you're experiencing this place. You have this joy, this appreciation, a connection to this fishery. It needs your voice to help protect it.
Right.
And so use whatever platform you have as a conduit to bring people into this effort.
I love that.
Would you go? Do you still guide at all?
No, I do not.
Would you like to go back to it at some point?
Oh God, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. The reality of that is, it's very slim. One, this isn't a fight that's going to be over tomorrow. And also to build a successful guide business, which, I mean, you know a lot of guides, but it takes years. Mm-hmm. And that book of business and clients and stuff that I built for 16 years, it got to the point where this required my full attention. And so I handed that over to my fellow guides and stuff. So I'd be starting from scratch. And but that being said, I've got a 3-year-old kid, and I would sure love that if he wanted to be a fishing guide, that resource would be there and would be healthy enough for him to do that.
I love that. So I just one final question, a follow up to what you said on. Do you see a timeline? Like, this is an ongoing. This is never going to be like, okay, we solved this problem, moving on, and now I can start this. What's the timeline to finish like the big project, the biggest project you talked about?
So and it's a great question. It all depends on continued significant funding, and that depends on continued public pressure.
Right.
And there's so many variables in there. When you have a hurricane that wipes out, the entire Gulf Coast and has decimated the Carolinas.
Right.
People's attention shift away.
Sure.
So there's a lot of variables there. Who's in power? Who's the governor? Who's the Speaker of the House? Who's the Senate President? What are their political, affiliations? The national economy. What money is available to send money to the Everglades every year, and so there's a lot of variables there. But what we see is the decline that we saw when the Everglades were drained, and they connected Lake Okeechobee to the Caloosahatchee River, and they straightened the river and started dumping the water out to the coast 100 years ago. Our fisheries didn't just collapse. Mm-hmm. They slowly started declining. And the longer they declined, the faster they declined. And so I relate it a lot to smoking, right? The day you start smoking, your lungs aren't screwed. But after 20 years, you're feeling the impact a lot more rapidly. Right. Recovery is very much the same, and restoration is very much the same. It's not like we have to wait to see everything done to see any benefit. Right. We get incremental benefit as more projects come online. And so
makes sense.
We are already seeing benefits.
Most definitely.
But the more projects that come online, the more tools that are then available in the toolbox for water managers, more places to put water and the more capacity to clean that water, the more positive impact we see. So, I would say, if funding continues, we should see hopefully that EAA reservoir that I spoke about completed and operational early 2030, 2032, somewhere, like I said, so 6-7 years from now.
That's fantastic.
Seems so far away, but it's really close, isn't it?
It does. And
kind of like turning 50.
But there's other things, like I said, like the bridges on Tamiami Trail, decompartmentalizing the area between Lake Okeechobee and Tamiami Trail so that water can flow once again, doesn't get bottlenecked up in parts of that system. So we're seeing a lot of progress. I think ultimately, though, this is going to be an effort that you have to fight for probably forever. Yeah. Just to ward off bad decisions and bad changes. I mean, people made changes to the system to drain the Everglades 100 years ago because they thought it was a great idea.
Right.
They weren't doing it maliciously.
Right. Yeah.
And here we are going, holy shit, this was a terrible idea.
Right.
So there's always that threat of things being done with one intention that have these other negative consequences.
Yep.
Fair.
We understand that completely. As you know, we have OFDT Foundation, and our fight and our voice, kind of like your soapbox, is always to save our homeless population of kids in our backyard. And I think same thing. Our advocacy is always trying to get out
Never
there.
going to go away.
Never going to go away. You know, there are always going to be children that are homeless that are expected to come into the classroom and learn the same way as a kid next to them, and they've slept in their car for
That's
the
not
last
reality.
3 nights. Yeah.
And the connection there, you know, I know people who were kayak tour guides,
Yeah.
you know, invested life savings into kayak rentals and paddle boards that lost their businesses because of these water
Yeah.
quality issues, that ended up living in their car with their
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, it's sad, and it happens in our own backyard, and we allow that to happen, and those kids to. And I think you talk about, you know, the impact. Lee County decided years over 50 years ago to not have what were technically called orphanages because they wanted placement of all students, but now they don't have enough foster homes, and so we have no place to put these kids. And so the outcome is that we need to revisit those things, and where are those homes so that we don't have kids in a Salvation Army with homeless men. And it's just it's an ongoing battle. So we understand completely because we advocate for that. We appreciate you coming in and sharing all of your knowledge.
And your time. And your
Yeah.
time. And we can't thank you enough from the community itself
Yeah.
and from people that are in the community. Thank you for taking that lead on that, because we needed that somebody
To do that.
to kind of drive the
Yeah.
train. And
Well, it's a group effort, and you know, the effectiveness of Captains for Clean Water is not Captains for Clean Water.
Yeah.
It's the hundreds of thousands of people that engage with us on these issues. Without people, you know, being involved, we're just pissed off fishermen who
Yeah.
quit our jobs.
and we're
Well,
pissed
we-
off realtors, so we're with you.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. So we are Jess and Erin with Best Business Partners. Thank you, Chris Wittman, Captain
you,
Chris Wittman, for joining us from Captains for Clean Water. We appreciate you following us. Follow us on social media at Old Florida Dream Team. We are here for all of your real estate needs, commercial, luxury, land, you name it in real estate, we do it. Just looking for data? Give us a call. We'd love to help you at 239-744-1944. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.